You know, when you hear the phrase personal transformation, it is incredibly easy to just picture a movie montage.
Oh, absolutely. The classic training sequence.
Right. Like, we're conditioned to expect these cinematic quick cuts where, I don't know, someone throws out every piece of junk food in their pantry.
Where they're sitting cross-legged on some misty mountaintop.
Exactly. And suddenly the music swells and they are just an entirely new
We
person.
universally love that idea, the instant upgrade.
We really do. We want the result without um, the grueling friction of the actual process.
Yeah, the messy part.
Right. But today, we are exploring a framework that completely rejects that instant gratification. We are taking a really close look at a transcript of a sermon delivered by Rick DePaolis on February 8, 2026.
And it's titled Power of the Gospel.
Yes. And the mission for this deep dive is to unpack the actual mechanics of personal transformation as presented in this text.
And I think it's important to note right up front that regardless of your personal background or beliefs, DePaolis outlines a highly structural, deeply pragmatic philosophy here.
Yeah, it's very step by step.
It really is. It's a philosophy of self-improvement and spiritual discipline. We're going to look at his very specific definitions of terms like renewing, transforming, and cooperating.
To see how they build this cohesive model for change. Yeah.
Exactly. Through a theological lens, obviously, but very methodical.
Well, to understand how a person changes, the text insists we first have to look at how they're protected during that highly vulnerable process.
Right, the starting point.
Yeah. DePaolis opens by addressing this classic concept, the armor of God. Specifically, she zeroes in on the footwear.
The shoes of the preparation of the gospel of peace.
Right, that's the one. But he makes an observation that redefines the concept entirely. He points out that this armor is absolutely not one size fits all.
Which is a huge distinction.
It is. He tells his audience, your shoes aren't fitted for me and mine aren't fitted for you. He actually compares this spiritual protection to an exoskeleton.
Oh, wow, yeah. That mechanical metaphor completely changes the dynamic of the protection.
Doesn't it?
It does. I mean, an exoskeleton isn't just a heavy shield you hide behind. It's a molded, articulated structure, right?
Right, designed to conform exactly to the wearer's physical body.
Exactly. It enhances their specific capabilities while, compensating for their specific weaknesses.
The text actually points to the biblical story of David and Goliath to illustrate this.
Right, because David famously couldn't wear King Saul's armor to fight Goliath.
Because it just simply wasn't fitted for him. It was
Yeah.
massive, clunky, restrictive. It wasn't his.
And DePaolis issues a really stern warning based on this idea of custom-fitted protection.
He does. He argues that because this exoskeleton is molded to your unique contours, you are never supposed to take a single piece of it off.
Not even one piece.
Nope. The text asserts that the second you remove a piece of this custom protection, the devil sees it, and that's where he's going to attack.
So that establishes a very high-stakes, constant vulnerability for the individual.
It really does. And, it makes total sense if you think about it in terms of wearing, like, a custom-tailored wetsuit versus renting a generic one at a dive shop.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
Right. If you rent a generic wetsuit, it is never going to fit perfectly. It's going to bag at the knees. It's going to pinch your shoulders.
And it lets the cold water in.
Yes. Worst of all, it flushes freezing water right down your back. A generic suit actually restricts your movement.
It drains your energy instead of saving it.
Exactly. But a custom wetsuit is molded to your exact physical contours. It moves flawlessly when you move. It protects you without you even noticing it's there.
Think about your own life and how often we try to put on someone else's generic armor.
Oh, all the time.
We buy a best-selling self-help book, or we try to copy a mentor's exact morning routine, and we wonder why it feels restrictive.
Or why it fails to protect us from burnout.
Right. By establishing that the armor is custom-fitted, the text sets up this foundational premise that any true journey of transformation is highly individualized.
It's not about conforming to a generic mold.
Not at all. It requires recognizing that the tools, the protection, and the ultimate path you take, well, they must be tailored to your exact life circumstances.
You simply cannot borrow someone else's epiphanies.
Well said.
But even with this custom-fit armor, protection implies an active threat.
Sure.
DePaolis shifts gears here to reveal that the real threat isn't just outside forces, it's our own resistance to profound internal change.
And he does this by introducing a really striking cognitive reframe.
Yeah, he explains that his favorite question to ask when studying scripture is no longer why, but rather and.
Swapping those two tiny words radically alters the trajectory of a person's thinking.
It really does, because asking why is often backward looking, right?
Exactly. It seeks to find a root cause or sometimes to assign blame for a current situation.
Whereas asking, and what else, is inherently forward looking.
It accepts the current premise and demands the next logical step.
So he applies this and strategy to the book of Romans, specifically Romans 1.1, which discusses the gospel being the power of God unto salvation.
And for many people, the concept of salvation simply means being rescued.
Right. You're pulled out of the burning building, you check the box, and you're good to go.
You're safe.
Yeah. But by asking, and what else? DePaolis concludes that salvation is significantly more than just a rescue mission.
The text argues that the power involved is not just to save you from an external consequence, but to fundamentally alter the human being from the inside out.
And he draws a really hard line here between two specific words, renewing and transforming.
Right. Which on the surface seem like synonyms.
They sound like splitting hairs, honestly, until you look at his precise definitions.
According to his framework, renewing is fundamentally cognitive. It's about changing how you think.
So it happens in the mind.
Exactly. As you read, study, and shift your mental models. However, renewing is not the final destination. It serves as the catalyst.
It's like, it's the software update that tells the hardware what to do next.
That is a great way to visualize it. Renewing your mind leads directly to transformation.
So if renewing is changing your thoughts, transforming is changing the fundamental DNA of who you are.
It is a complete change in your state of being. And the text explicitly rejects the idea of near conformity.
Right, he states emphatically that God does not want us to be conformed.
The goal is not to mimic the behavior of the people around you in your community.
Or, as he jokes, to just look at Brother Rick.
Right, right. Instead, he describes true transformation as a restoration to what humanity originally had in the garden.
So the ultimate goal of putting on this custom exoskeleton and engaging in this mental renewing is to systematically strip away the corrupted elements of the old self.
The text frames this as almost an archaeological dig of the human soul.
I love that. Attempting to bypass years of learned behaviors.
And cultural conformity.
Yeah, to get back to an uncorrupted foundational state, reflecting the original image of God.
But that brings up a really interesting point about the pacing of all this.
It does introduce a glaring timeline problem. If the ultimate goal is this complete restoration, and you have your custom armor on, why doesn't it happen immediately?
Well, the text argues that sudden, overnight transformation would be utterly destructive to the human system.
DePaolis directly addresses this universal frustration of slow progress. He cites the book of 2 Corinthians.
Pointing out that right now, human perception is heavily flawed.
Right, we see things darkly, through a glass.
Yeah.
And because our understanding is so cloudy, change cannot happen all at once.
The text states it only happens from glory to glory.
Just a tiny fraction at a time. He literally tells his audience not to expect to change overnight.
He claims that if God transformed you entirely in an instant, you would be a complete mess.
You'd be destroyed rather than transformed.
The psychological realism in that claim is really what anchors this entire framework.
How so?
Well, it acknowledges that human beings lack the structural integrity to handle massive, instantaneous paradigm shifts without their identity just collapsing.
Oh, it operates on the exact same physiological principles as deep-sea decompression.
Okay, unpack that.
So if you have a professional diver working hundreds of feet down at the bottom of the ocean, their body has physically adapted to immense, crushing atmospheric pressure.
Right.
If you yank that diver up to the surface instantly, the sudden lack of pressure is catastrophic. Nitrogen bubbles form in their bloodstream. It causes the bends.
It can be fatal.
Literally fatal. You have to acclimatize slowly. You have to sit in a decompression chamber and let your system adjust to the new reality, inch by inch, hour by hour.
That maps perfectly onto what DePaolis is describing psychologically and spiritually.
It really does. You cannot pull someone from years of deeply ingrained corrupted habits into absolute purity without causing catastrophic shock to their system.
And the text describes this painfully slow decompression journey as being punctuated by what he calls lights come on moments.
Those moments where you slap your forehead and say, oh yeah, duh.
We all experience those way stations of learning.
Yeah.
You spend months in darkness or confusion, lacking understanding about why you are facing a specific hardship.
Or repeating a specific mistake.
Right. Then, through engaging with the text or going through the struggle, the darkness is illuminated. You have that sudden realization of a concept clicking into place.
DePaolis actually notes that God intentionally brings you to your enemy and throws them out little by little, quote, so that your faith is increased.
The struggle itself is the mechanism for building the capacity to hold the transformation.
So by overcoming incremental obstacles, the individual builds resilience.
Exactly. If you somehow bypass the struggle and get the instant movie montage upgrade, you bypass the structural integrity required to actually sustain that change when real pressure is applied.
Sitting in a decompression chamber implies a lot of passive waiting, though. But the text actually outlines a highly active, exhausting role for the individual in this process.
Yes, the mechanics of participation.
Right. DePaolis wrestles in real time with the exact vocabulary to describe human participation.
He tests out the word surrender,
He tests out the word submit.
but he ultimately lands heavily on the word cooperate, which he credits to a brother Alex from his Sunday school.
You know, when I first read that, the word cooperate sounded almost too equitable. It sounds like a 50-50 business partnership.
I could see that.
You don't typically hear about a human cooperating with a divine transformation as if they're co-CEOs.
The text addresses this tension by defining cooperation not as equal power, but as mandatory active participation.
You cannot just sit back and wait for the lights to come on.
Exactly. DePaolis explicitly links this cooperation to strenuous daily effort. For him, the primary mechanisms for walking in the Spirit are prayer and studying the Word.
He states bluntly, I don't know any other way.
And he adds that if he neglects those two practices, the negative effects are immediately obvious.
So this cooperation requires a daily dismantling of the human ego. He references the apostles Peter and Paul saying, I die daily.
It is the continuous, exhausting recognition that whatever progress you made yesterday is completely insufficient for the challenges you are going to face today.
Wow. A major component of that daily ego death involves a concept he calls casting down all imaginations.
Right, referencing 2 Corinthians 10.5, which discusses taking every thought into captivity.
It's essentially cognitive behavioral therapy, but applied to theology.
It really is. It requires an intense level of self-regulation.
But DePaolis adds a crucial caveat here that keeps the framework from becoming entirely oppressive.
And it's a very important distinction.
Yeah. He clarifies that not all imaginations are bad. A lot of our imaginations actually bring us closer to God.
They inspire us. They make us realize our need for something larger than ourselves.
The text does not demand that you shut off your brain or stop being a creative, imaginative human being.
No, it demands an active, daily filtration system for your thoughts.
You are only required to capture and cast down the imaginations and high things that, quote, exalt themselves against the knowledge of God.
So if a thought spirals up and tries to convince you that your way is better than the ultimate goal of transformation,
You have to actively catch it and say, no, I'm not doing that. I'm going by the word.
but, maintaining that level of intense cognitive filtration 24 hours a day is statistically impossible for a human being.
Frank, 100%. The system is eventually going to break down under the weight of everyday life.
And the text is profoundly pragmatic about that exact reality.
It really is. DePaolis doesn't offer a 10-step plan to achieve flawless perfection. He literally tells the audience, you're going to mess up.
He references the biblical proverb that a just man falls 7 times,
Joking that for him, the number is probably a lot higher than 7.
which is very relatable. The framework establishes a very pragmatic stance on failure. The core thesis is that the shame is not in the falling.
The shame is in refusing to get back up.
Exactly. Failure is explicitly framed as empirical data. The text describes the thought process of a believer making mistake as, I tried that didn't work, so let me do it God's way.
So the failure provides the necessary, hard-earned evidence that the old, corrupted way of living is structurally insufficient.
And God is portrayed as taking far more delight in this messy, ongoing, repetitive act of a human getting back up and choosing to cooperate again.
Rather than demanding perfect, empty sacrifices.
Right.
It is a fascinating narrative choice to end such high-minded theology with an anecdote that perfectly proves this point about messy reality.
Oh, the ending is amazing.
We spend this entire transcript deep in the weeds of cognitive filtration, the human ego, and profound divine transformation. And then, completely out of nowhere, DePaolis gets interrupted mid-sermon.
Because the real world always intrudes on the mountaintop.
Always. He suddenly announces to the audience that his sister Linda has informed him he needs to wrap up the sermon.
Because they have Super Bowl soups for sale.
Yes. And she absolutely does not want the soups to get cold. It is such a hilarious, jarring pivot.
It really grounds the whole thing.
He even jokes from the pulpit about blaming her for cutting the sermon short, immediately catches himself and repents out loud for lying about it, and then rushes to deliver his final conclusion.
That moment is the perfect embodiment of what actual transformation looks like in practice.
It really is. It demonstrates that you do not undergo profound change in a sterile, perfectly controlled vacuum.
You don't get to stay in the decompression chamber forever.
Right. You have to practice your daily cooperation and your cognitive filtering while actively dealing with the mundane, humorous, irritating pressures of the people around you.
Community events and cold soup.
Exactly. You don't get to take your custom-fit exoskeleton off just because the theology lecture is over and it's time to go buy lunch.
You have to wear it right into the fellowship hall.
You apply the framework to the soup.
Exactly.
So let's recap the mechanics of this journey. If you want to undergo profound interchange, this text argues you must start by recognizing your specific custom-fit protection.
You cannot borrow someone else's armor or someone else's path.
You have to shift your perspective from looking backward with why to looking forward with and what else.
Allowing your mind to be continually renewed so your fundamental state of being can transform.
And you must accept a painfully slow glory-to-glory pace.
Understanding that instant change would cause systemic collapse.
Right. You must actively cooperate daily, treating your thoughts as a filtration system. And crucially, you must view your inevitable failures as vital data points that guide you back to the process of getting up.
The text offers an ultimate reward for committing to this grueling process, too.
It does. DePaolis closes his sermon by referencing Exodus 19.5.
The promise presented is that through this messy, daily repetition of cooperation, a person ceases to be just another face in the crowd.
They become, as the text translates it, God's treasured possession out of all the earth.
The implication being that immense value is derived not from achieving a state of flawless perfection, but from being the individual who continually chooses to endure the friction of change.
As we wrap up this deep dive, take a moment to think back to that exoskeleton metaphor from the very beginning of our discussion.
It's a powerful image.
We explored how an exoskeleton is perfectly custom-fitted and has the potential to be incredibly powerful. But the defining characteristic of an exoskeleton is that it does not move itself.
It just sits there, dormant.
Right. It only activates and it only amplifies the physical movements of the person inside it. So if cooperation is the absolute key to this entire framework, what is the small intentional movement you need to make today so that your custom-fit protection can amplify it?
That is a highly practical question to carry forward.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, whatever you are reading, whatever you are studying, keep asking, and what else?